Prior to the outbreak of the Second World War, tensions had been growing amongst the Polish-German community in the Polish town of Chojnice, a reflection of the wider issues between the two countries. The ethnic Germans living in the town found themselves increasingly unpopular. Shortly after this protest, on 7 April, a boycott of German businesses was announced. Unsurprisingly, a few Polish Germans felt they were better off elsewhere, and the Polish 1st Rival Brigade reported the desertion of several ethnic Germans. With the outbreak of the Second World War, on 1 September 1939, the Germans sneaked an armored train into Chojnice train station. At 4:15 that morning, they had informed the Poles that a fast civilian train would be passing through between Berlin and Königsberg, a journey that, due to the existence of the Polish corridor, would require the German trains to pass through Polish territory. However, the civilian train was actually Panzerzug 3, an armored military train. Due to heavy fog that morning, the Germans were able to creep up undetected to the railway station and catch the Poles off guard. They had managed to capture the station with relatively little if any resistance. However, any celebrations would be premature, as the Poles were soon to respond. The Polish colonel named Majewski was informed of the German incursion and quickly gathered the 1st Chojnice company of the 1st Infantry Division and sent it to the station with orders to prevent the Germans from progressing any further. Captain Sochanik was in charge of the Polish forces, and he quickly set up a command post close to the railway station. Polish Lieutenant Nocek was put in charge of leading the forces that would assault and hopefully expel the Germans from the station. Like the Germans, the Poles made good use of the fog, and using the station building as cover, managed to creep up to the train undetected. A firefight then broke out as the Poles approached in tireless formation. The soldiers spaced out a few meters apart from one another. The Germans were unaware of the size of the attacking Polish force and retreated inside the armored train, taking their prisoners with them. The Panzerzug then retreated out of the station and withdrew some distance back to a nearby railway viaduct. Nocek then attacked again, hoping to drive the Germans away completely, but the fortified defenders, well protected inside the armored train, were able to repel the exposed Polish troops who were attacking across open ground, inflicting heavy casualties with accurate machine gun fire. In response to the determined German defense, Polish 75mm cannons from the 1st Division were brought into the battle, and their accurate heavy fire quickly started to pay dividends. The command tower of the train was smashed by a shell, killing the train commander, Lieutenant Erich Yoon. The train, realizing the jeopardy it was now in, started to retreat further up the line towards the border. Polish sappers from the Hazdza company then demolished one of the viaducts over the Lisznowska road, lying about a kilometer from the station, and the resulting explosion destroyed the bridge, the collapsing rubble also damaging and derailing some of the train carriages. This essentially immobilized the train, but the Germans attempted to detach the damaged carriages and make their escape in the rest of the train. However, the Poles continued to batter the now stationary Panzerzug with artillery fire, maneuvering an artillery platoon closer to direct fire at a close range. By a miracle, the carriage containing the Polish prisoners remained unscathed, as the rest of the carriages were raked with shellfire and started to burn. Finally, one of the Polish shells struck the ammunition wagon, the explosion of which tossed the wagon into the air. This proved to be the final straw for the German soldiers, who promptly abandoned the train and beat a hasty retreat. However, the train crew continued to hold out, thus preventing the liberation of the Polish prisoners. An armored car affixed to tracks had been separated by the Poles and directed down a dead-end track. Here there was a short firefight, as the surrounded and outnumbered Germans were quickly overwhelmed, with one being killed and the rest taken prisoner. Despite the determined Polish actions in recapturing the station and driving off the train, it was ultimately futile, with the German forces invading Poland at several points and the Poles being driven back. The town of Chojnice itself fell to German forces later that afternoon, with the 20th Infantry Division assaulting the town at 2 p.m. and finally capturing it at 5 after heavy fighting. In this region, the advancing forces were the German 76th Infantry Regiment under the command of Colonel Hans Golnik and the 20th Motorized Division led by Lieutenant General Maurits von Victorn. There was around 850 German armored vehicles involved and about 30 artillery pieces. They were operating on the left flank of the 19th Panzer Corps, which was commanded by the German tank supremo General Heinz Guderian, a highly talented German officer who would go on to gain much prominence during the Battle of France. With such a powerful force at their disposal, it is unsurprising that the Germans managed to break through the Polish lines, forcing the Polish border guards to retreat towards the defense line at Berda. In order to try and give the border guards time to redeploy properly, the 18th Pomeranian Uline Regiment were tasked with delaying the advancing Germans. Uhlans were essentially heavily armed cavalry, which in previous centuries had ridden into battle armed with lances and sabers. With the advent of more modern warfare though, the outdated weaponry had been replaced with various artillery pieces, 37mm anti-tank, 40mm anti-aircraft, or even 75mm artillery pieces. Many of the Uhlans also carried slung over their shoulders the WZ-35 anti-tank rifle, a hefty rifle-shaped weaponry which could be utilized by a single individual, and as the name suggests, could prove effective against armored cars or light tanks. And at this stage of the war, the Germans were mainly using Panzer I and Panzer II light tanks, so although they operated on horseback, they were significantly different both in their role and how they were equipped, from the more traditional depiction of a cavalry. The Second World War was the last time they operated in horseback, with subsequent Uline formations converting to armored vehicles. As the Uhlans advanced, they spotted a contingent of German infantry resting in a clearing near Tuchula Forest, close to the crossroads of Hojnice-Runowa-Pomorysky line. Sensing an opportunity, the Uline commander Colonel Kazimierz ordered the commander of his first squadron, Swieczek, to take his 250 Uhlans and charge straight at the Germans, whilst he kept the rest of his force in reserve. The alarmed Germans, presumably shocked to suddenly see 250 Uhlans thundering towards them, broke and fled, surrendering the position to the Poles. However, the Germans were quick to respond, sending armored reconnaissance vehicles forward, which lumbered out of the forest and started spraying the Polish positions with machine gun fire, mainly from MG34 and 20mm machine guns. Uhlans are at their most effective charging full speed towards an exposed enemy. They are less effective when trying to hold relatively exposed ground against armored vehicles, especially when they lack the time to properly consolidate the position. And in this situation, the quick and violent German response was key, forcing the Uhlans to withdraw and try and seek cover behind a nearby hill. Colonel Swieczek and Mastelers were killed in the skirmish, the latter when trying to save the former, and about a third of the Polish force was left dead or wounded. However, they had succeeded in delaying the German advance and bought time for the Polish 1st Rifle Battalion and the National Defense Battalion to withdraw from the nearby Battle of Hojnice. Furthermore, the brave actions of the Polish Uhlans had left an impression on the Germans, causing them to proceed with more caution, with the powerful 20th Motorized Infantry Division even contemplating retreating. It took several hours for the Germans to reorganize, and an intervention from Guderian himself to steady German nerves and get their plans back on track. As he stated in his memoirs, upon investigating the aftermath of the Polish charge, he found his soldiers wearing helmets preparing an anti-tank gun for a possible Polish cavalry attack, and he also noted that eventually the panic of the first day of war was overcome quickly. The Polish charge only involved around 250 Uhlans, and yet they managed seriously alarm and terrorize an entire infantry division. This was an impressive and noteworthy achievement, even if it did come at a great cost. The following day, the 18th Pomeranian Uhlans Regiment was decorated by General Skotnicki with the highest medal, awarded for showing bravery in combat. Shortly after the battle had come to a close, German and Italian war correspondents were escorted to the battlefield and shown the corpses of the fallen Polish Uhlans, along with some German tanks which had arrived after the battle had concluded. The Italian journalist Indro Manzanilli sent a dispatch home recounting the bravery of the Polish soldiers, describing them as having charged the German tanks with sabers and lances. Thank you for watching. If you liked the video, be sure to click that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click the bell to be notified about our latest videos.